my pleasure to introduce Mary. Mary has worked for over a decade in developer relations, so your relationship with your clients and your relationships with your managers and you as yourself. Her dog down here, Ember, is so adorable. It's cute as a button. You should come closer just so you can see more of Ember through the whole talk. She owns the company Persea Consulting, and she's going to give a great talk today about burnout.
Thanks. Appreciate it. Hi, everybody. Hope you're all doing well today. So as Miguel said, I'm talking to you today about burnout. And I know a lot of talks that we often hear are about how to improve your company, improve your community, monitor things on your website, improve processes, and things like that. And burnout isn't a topic that comes up as often, but I'd argue that it's actually more important than some of those other topics. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about just who I am, why it's important for me to monitor myself. I'll give you a little background on Ember and why he's here with me as well. And then it's not all about me, so we'll be talking about why is it important for all of us to monitor ourselves, and then talking about steps to take in order to prevent burnout in both ourselves as well as in our teams and the people around us. I'd love to do a quick count of the room to see kind of who all's here. So if you're in management, can you raise your hand? Handful of managers? Okay. If you're in engineering, operations, technical folks? Most of you? Okay, cool. Marketing, sales? No? Bueller? Okay. All right. Security? No. Support? Customer support? No. All right, cool. That gives me a good idea. I guess HR, culture, internal community. Everyone right in front. I like that. Thank you. Awesome. So you can tell I have my information, my Twitter and stuff up on the screen. More importantly, I have Ember's name and Twitter up on the screen, so if you only want to follow him and not me, I understand. No hard feelings. But let's jump right in. So who am I? I am a community builder, personally and professionally. I love people. I have always loved people. I love storytelling. I love finding out people's stories and then helping other people understand the stories and where people are coming from. That led me into tech. So I kind of like to say I'm a journalist turned community advocate. So advocating for the people in my communities, advocating for the companies outward to the communities. And I use my feature writing and storytelling abilities from my journalism years to help explain the business value of technical communities within technical companies whose main audience is developers. And these days, as Miguel said, I have a decade in, or over a decade these days, in working with developer communities from places like O'Reilly Media and Chef Software and a smaller company called SparkPost. These days, I'm running my own company called Persea Consulting, working with companies that are trying to figure out what does a technical community look like for us? How does that work? Who do we need? How do we put that into practice? All of those types of things. And some of the things that I do as a result of that, I provide resources for people in those communities and people who are trying to do developer relations and community building. So I recently published a book. It came out end of last year. It was a huge project. If any of you have ever written a book, you know that, and you know how glad you are that it's done when it's done. So I'm grateful that that's out of the way, but it was a lot of fun. I run a weekly newsletter called DevRel Weekly that kind of keeps people up to date on developer relations news and blogs and happenings. And then I help run a podcast called Community Pulse as well. But the reason why I'm here today, as you can see, I'm involved in a lot of things. And because I'm involved in a lot of things, I'm also very aware of the fact that I need to be taking care of myself in addition to all of my side projects. So a little bit more about my story. I live in San Francisco. This picture is on the top of Tank Hill in San Francisco, one of the places where you can kind of go for an urban hike, if you will. And there was a long time where I called my home in San Francisco an expensive storage unit because I was on the road a lot for work and rarely home. And these days I'm lucky to be home far more often and actually getting to enjoy the city. And you can tell both with me in front of you and based on the screen, I don't look like someone who needs a service dog. And Ember, my dog, doesn't look like a typical service dog. So we're a good fit for each other in that sense, right? But I am a type 1 diabetic. And as a lot of mental illnesses or some other chronic illnesses are, it's what we call an invisible disease. So it's something that's not really easy to notice when you meet someone for the first time. It's not easy to tell how it impacts them on a day-to-day basis. But more often than not, it has a drastic impact on our lives, both mentally, physically, emotionally, as well as how we interact with other people. So for you to understand just how much it's changed my life, you need to understand a little bit more about what type 1 diabetes is and isn't. So there are 29 million Americans that have some form of diabetes, pre-diabetes, type 1 diabetes, type 2, or gestational. But only 5% of us are type 1. So for obvious reasons, the majority of the research and knowledge and things that are out there about diabetes is geared toward type 2, which leads to a lot of misconceptions and general lack of knowledge around type 1, like this. Right. So diabetes is not, type 1 diabetes is not caused by excessive weight or not taking care of yourself. It's not caused by your parents feeding you too much sugar as a kid, unlike what one of my college roommates tried to tell me. It's not preventable. There's nothing that I can do to fix it. It's not going away. It's not curable at the time, though they're working toward that. But it is an autoimmune disease, and my body essentially attacked itself and killed off all of my pancreatic cells. And it's chronic. So like I said, while it's treatable, it doesn't have a cure. Then it kind of looks like this on a day-to-day basis for me. There's a few devices that I wear. One gives me insulin on a regular basis and helps me kind of maintain a stable blood sugar. The other one tracks my blood sugar and lets me know where I'm at any given point during the day. I also carry a lot of supplies with me, right? So things that will raise my blood sugar, things that will lower my blood sugar, and for me, Ember, who helps keep me on track as well. So while it's invisible to most people, like I mentioned earlier, it has a huge impact on those of us who are living with it on a daily basis. But it doesn't keep me from doing the things that I love to do. I love going for bike rides. I love indoor wind tunnels. I love hiking and spending time with my niece and everything else. And a lot of that ability to lead a normal life for me comes from my sidekick, Ember. And I tend to be a very independent, I can do this myself type of person. And he winds up helping out a lot with that and with the ability for me to do that. So quick story about him. Hi, good boy. I actually got him as a pet and had no intention of having him as a service dog for me. But about 2 years after I got him, he started waking me up in the middle of the night and standing on my chest, barking in my face, really hardcore adrenaline wake up, right? And within about 20 minutes of him waking me up, I'd start to feel like my blood sugar was going low. And about 2 or 3 times after this happened, I realized, okay, there's a pattern here, and he's matching patterns, and he's trying to alert me before my blood sugar goes low. And for me, that was a perfect monitoring system, right? The ability for something to come up and go, hang on, there's about to be a problem, and it's not quite there yet, but you're gonna wanna know that it's there in the future. And so there's been a lot of things that he's taught me as I've been traveling with him for the last 8 years or so. And one of them that I've started to realize is having those ways to monitor ourselves and be warned before we run into issues. For me, it's blood sugar. It's also burnout. Working too much, keeping a better balance of myself, both physically, emotionally, mentally, is a huge key in making sure that I am running at top capacity and able to do all of those things that I mentioned earlier that I'm heavily involved in. So, what about you? How does this relate to everyone here, other than you get to see a cute dog and maybe meet him when I'm out on the road? I'm going to switch to a couple numbers. So 7% of the population admits that they struggle with some sort of mental disability or illness, invisible illnesses, things like that, that too often get misunderstood and aren't acknowledged by others in society, either due to lack of understanding or simply not being aware that it's an issue because it's invisible to those around us. I am 3 times more likely to suffer from things like depression because of the toll that a chronic illness takes on you, because it's something that you're dealing with day after day after day. So this is something that I'm far more aware of. And like I said, it's helpful for me to have a dog like Ember who can give me those alerts in advance so that I'm not having to keep as close of an eye on myself throughout the day. But this last number up here, and the reason why this applies to all of you as well, is this 49% is the number of, percentage of people in tech, particularly managers, leaders, founders, but also people who are working long hours, who are heavily involved in big projects, who have a lot of responsibility, like all of you do, who struggle with depression and something closely related, which you might all be familiar with, burnout. And these numbers are astoundingly high. And to me, that's not okay. Like 49%, that's look to the person next to you. Either you're struggling with that or they are, right? It's a huge, huge percentage. And so if you're not a manager, founder, leader in your company, which not all of you are, obviously, but we all do work in or adjacent to the tech industry, right? So a couple years ago, I did a quick Google search for burnout in tech. And can anyone see what that number is at the very top? How many results turned up in that Google search? 19 million. It's a decent amount, right? So 19 million results for burnout in tech. And even if we say that only 10% of these are relevant and accurate information, that's still almost 2 million results. And I have to say, when I started doing talks about burnout in 2015, I did the same Google search, and there are 1 million results. So we're on a trajectory, huge trajectory. Things have been growing exponentially. And it's either because we're talking about it more and people are more aware of it, which is fantastic and awesome, and I'm so happy for that, or because it's becoming an even bigger problem than we originally thought. But either way, I think it's safe to say that there is a problem. There is an issue with burnout in tech. So if you're giving me this look right now, which a few of you might be, I don't want to be a downer. I don't want to predict that all of us in this room will go through burnout at some point. I want to actually prevent burnout and make sure that people don't have to. But I am saying there's a problem with it in our industry and that we need to fix it, and that the easiest way to fix a problem is to start with ourselves and those around us, right? So how do we do that? And I'm going to preface everything else that I say with, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychologist. If you're struggling with burnout, if you're struggling with depression, please, please, please go seek help, go find someone to talk to who's qualified to give you advice and medication on those levels. But I do have personal experience in this area. I burned out really hard about 4 years ago, pushed myself to do too many things and be involved in too many projects and too many things that I cared too deeply about. And I've been trying to figure out how to not burn out again since then. So the first thing that I dove into figuring out when this happened to me was what causes burnout in the first place, right? Because if we can figure out what causes it, we can work on prevention. And there's a couple books that I found at the time, and I'll be referencing things from both of these today. They're both fantastic resources. I'd encourage you to pick them both up. And just a little bit about both of them. So Overwhelmed covers some information around time management and just some fascinating observations about our culture in the US and how we tend to handle stress, how we tend to handle work-life balance, how places around the world do that, workplace environments, things like that. And The Truth About Burnout by Dr. Christina Maslach covers a lot of principles of basic causes of burnout, and they resonate pretty well with a lot of things that I've heard and felt. So I'm going to cover a little bit of that today, cover a few quotes from Overwhelmed as well, but I encourage you all to pick up copies of these if you're interested in learning more. So, first cause for burnout is a feeling of a lack of control. And I think this GIF explains it really well, right? We start really excited and we're gonna do this thing and we're gonna conquer this new hobby or this new project, and then we get overwhelmed because we don't know what we're doing and we don't have the right resources and we aren't set up for success, whether that's management, whether that's we're overworking, whatever it might be. And one of the easiest causes for burnout is switching jobs. Or excuse me, not easiest causes, easiest covers for burnout is switching jobs. And so there's so many times when we get started on these things and we get super excited about what we're doing, and then we get tired or a little bit down about it, and we go, oh, okay, well, let me jump over to this project because I'm really excited about this, and maybe I just ran out of motivation over here. And I've done that, right, where you get a year and a half into a job and it's really exhausting, and you go, oh, well, there's a new opportunity over there. Let me switch companies or switch departments. And it's a really easy way to cover up burnout because you've got this new relationship energy, right? The excitement of trying something new, the excitement of new people, but you're really just covering up all of the symptoms that you've had before because you're still working too much. You're still not taking care of yourself. You're still not balancing things out. And then you're right back where you started. The second and third causes are unfairness and insufficient reward. And I'm sure you all know someone, or maybe it's you, who's the go-to person for all of the questions across the board, for your team, for other people's teams across the company. And they're always picking up code reviews, giving someone else advice, helping out with various projects, helping a new employee learn the ropes, and that's all great. There's nothing wrong with those things. But what happens when those tasks all start to pile up and it seems to start to be unfair that that person is always given those responsibilities and their reward just isn't worth it to them anymore? There's been a few articles in Forbes and Harvard Business Review, Applied Social Psychology, and others that all state that past a certain point, the reward isn't monetary. And that no matter how much you're earning, no matter how much your salary is, it doesn't compensate for you're working 60 hours a week, you're working weekends, you're consistently being pulled out of sleep or time with friends to be on call or things like that. So we need to make sure that we actually feel good both about the work that we're doing and about the reward that we get in response. So I went back to this GIF only because it's absolutely one of my favorites, and I Love Lucy is an amazing show. Like I was saying, overwhelmedness, overwork, too many things going on, not feeling like you can keep up with what's happening, right? In a conversation with a close friend a few years ago, I said this: it's the constant overwhelmedness factor, the overflowing inbox, the never being in my home long enough to actually clean and get things organized the way I want them to be, the to-do list that's 5 pages long and only ever seems to grow, not shrink, and the burden of feeling like I'm the only one who can do all of these things, and then all of the guilt that comes with feeling all of those things as well. And Kanban boards and backlogs and things like that we've made to make a more lean team and a more lean environment can help to a certain point, but then what about the backlogs when they start overflowing? And when teams are too lean to actually work as a lean team, right? It becomes even more of a problem. The last one that I'm going to talk about today is a lack of community. And when we spend so much time investing in work, in code, in learning new skills, and trying to up-level ourselves in our careers, we sometimes fail to invest in our personal lives, and we start to drift away from our circle of friends as well. As my friend Jason says, community is those people who come looking for you when you don't show up. And I think so often when we get so invested in our work and so invested in what we're involved with on a day-to-day basis, we run into these issues of, well, I'm too tired to go out with people, or I'm too tired to go do that thing, or I have to be at work this weekend to finish up this project. And we lose track of these people who are willing to come find us when we don't show up. So, at this point, what do we do now, right? How do we fix this? So I'm going to do this in 2 parts. First one is the individual version. The second one is the management version. And they apply, I think, to both people, because the management version, even if you're not a manager, can help you keep an eye on people around you. So, how do we prevent it, and what do we do if we're already there? Because there is hope, I promise. The first thing and the most important thing to me is taking care of yourself first and foremost. Airlines are constantly reminding us to put on our own oxygen masks first before helping people around us, right? And it's not because they want people to not help their kids or they want older people to be without oxygen for longer. It's the idea that if you yourself don't have oxygen flowing, if you're having a hard time catching your breath, you won't be able to help the people around you. And so if you put your own oxygen mask on first, then suddenly you've got oxygen flow. You're able to think clearly, you're able to help more quickly, and then you're able to be of more service to the people around you. So here's some ways to make sure that we're all getting enough oxygen. The first one is step away from your laptop. And it's okay, right? I know we don't always think it is, but everyone should be able to carefully throw their laptop across the room, not out the window or across the street, hopefully, but carefully throw your laptop across the room and just step away and not be involved with it for a while. And it's hard, I get it. Part of the fun of being in tech is being able to step in and solve problems and figure out things and answer customer questions and solve the code review problem that everyone on your team has been worrying about for the whole week. But if you're always the person who's doing that, well, just one more pull request, or just one more deadline, or let me just hit that one more thing, then there's never an end line in sight for you to actually take a break and step back from everything. I used to have a friend who had a Post-it on their computer, and it said, "Is the world on fire? If no, stop. And if yes, call a firefighter." And there's 2 important principles here, right? We're not expected to be online 24/7. We should be able to take a break. And if that is the expectation, which I hope it's not here, but if it is, you need to sit down and have a serious conversation with your manager. Because this should not be the case. No exceptions. No one should be on call all the time. No one should be responsible to work through night and day through the weekends to finish up a particular project. There's nothing that's that important, that's that pressing. And then let your team know when you're going to be offline or when you're going to turn on Do Not Disturb or things like that. And unless something's actively on fire and you are the only person who can put it out, then tell them, I'm not to be disturbed, right? And chances are everything's going to be fine. And even if it's not, they can probably handle it because now you've given them the skills, you've empowered them to be able to take on those things themselves. The other thing that you can do with your calendar so that you can't skip them or you don't skip them is plan for vacation. And planning ahead for vacation and having one on the calendar at all times not only ensures that you're actually taking vacation, but it gives you something to look forward to. I don't know about you all, but planning a vacation is one of those like, oh, wait, hang on, okay. I have a 10-minute break right now, and I'm going to go look up what I'm going to do in Kansas City the next time I'm there. Or I'm going to New York in a couple months. What are we going to do while I'm there, right? So it gives you something to be planning for. It gives you something to be looking forward to. But it also ensures that vacation times don't get shoved to the bottom of your to-do list, which it all too often does, right? I run into companies all the time where they have not a specific amount of time off. So you get as much time off as you want, unlimited PTO, which can be great and can be done really well when there's a minimum in there and you have to take this much per year and blah, blah, blah. But it can also run into a problem when it's not constantly in the back of your mind of when am I going to stop accruing PTO and when do I need to take time off. I had a manager at a previous job who actually would look at our calendars and not in a micromanager or creepy way, but look at our calendar and say, you haven't taken any time off this month or last month. Before next Friday, you need to go put time off on your calendar, and it needs to be within this amount of time. And whether that's a day or two here so that we had a long weekend or an actual longer vacation, he made sure that we always had something on our calendar to make sure that we weren't working too much. And there's a lot of people who say, I don't have the time, or I'll plan a nice big vacation when I have the time to plan it. But honestly, when do we ever have the extra time to sit down and do those things, right? I had a different company where my manager was really bad at taking vacation. And his boss finally pulled him aside one day and said, look, you haven't taken a vacation all year. And it was like November. You haven't taken a vacation all year, and you don't have one planned either. So here's the deal. You're either going to plan and book a vacation for you and your family in the next week, or you're going to tell me what your schedule is and what your budget is, and I will book a vacation for you. And having a manager like that who's willing to step in and go, no, this is important. You need time off. You need time to recharge and refresh so that you can be fully on and fully functioning at work on a regular basis. I mentioned the book Overwhelmed earlier, and there's a quote in there when she realized that planning for leisure time takes effort. She says, I realized I kept putting it off, like I was waiting to reach some sort of tipping point. If I could just finish picking all the weeds, chopping the bamboo, cleaning up the crayons and shark teeth and map papers, buy more cat food, fix the coffee pot, do all these things, then I could finally sit down and read a book, as if leisure was something I needed to earn. And then she says something else that I think resonates with a lot of people. She said, even if I seemed to have some free time, it was often for such a short period that I was at a loss for what to do with it. So I just went on to the next item on the to-do list instead. And I'd encourage you to put down your to-do list and actually plan for a vacation, even if it means spending a little bit of extra money to get someone else to plan a vacation for you, or taking a staycation when you'd rather go somewhere else, but it seems to be too much of an effort to plan for that amount of time. Or just take a day off to be around home and be leisurely, but plan for that time or else it simply won't happen. Speaking of being offline, when you're sick, go home and be sick, right? I'm completely bad at this one. Like, oh, I don't feel that bad and I'll work from home so I don't get anyone in the office sick, but I'm still gonna sit in bed and I'm gonna sit here with my tissues and take my medicine every 4 hours, but I'm still gonna work because I have to get work done. But if you actually take advantage of sick days or vacation time or whatever Cerner happens to call it, you'll be amazed at how much more quickly you recover and how much more healthy you get and how much more you're able to contribute when you go back to the office. And bonus, your team will love you because you won't get them sick when you're contagious and working from the office. This is another type of being sick, but when you're needing mental care, get it. Because mental illness, depression, anxiety, all of those things are normal. And it's important to take care of. And it's important for you to recognize as normal. It's important for other people to recognize as normal as well. And don't let anyone else tell you differently. It's called mental illness for a reason, right? We're sick. We need to be taking care of it. And you can start by taking a look at your company insurance policy. I don't know how Cerner's works, but most insurance companies, most insurance policies will allow for a small number of counseling visits, psychologist, psychiatrist visits at no charge. So you really don't have anything to lose. I had a former colleague who would book out, we had 4 appointments per year that we could do for free that we could get reimbursed for. And he'd book them every year with a different psychologist so that there was no history or fear of them remembering things from a past year. And he'd just book the 4 appointments and go in and basically just word vomit all over them and walk away feeling so much better. Because it was someone that he could talk to and lay everything out with, and they could give him a few pointers and help him out a little bit. But it was an opportunity for him to just let everything out and kind of take a check of himself and go, okay, no, I'm doing all right. Or I'm heading a little bit toward depression, and I need to maybe actually start seeing this person on a regular basis. But he took advantage of those opportunities that his company allowed him to, and I'd encourage you to look and see the same thing as well. Something else you can do, finding your own communities and do what you can to invest in those communities. Believe it or not, Meetup, everyone's familiar with Meetup, meetup.com, meetups in general. Yeah, so they exist for more than just tech things. Yeah, they have photography meetups, there's running meetups, there's dog meetups, there's all sorts of meetups that exist all over the world. And figuring out what your hobbies are and then finding meetups that relate to that hobby can be hugely helpful if you're struggling with figuring out how do you relate to the people around you. How do you find new friends if you're new to a new city? How do you find people to hang out with, right? So use those tools that you already use for some tech things in a way that helps you build that personal community as well. Next, finding a place that you feel at home, finding a place that connects with you and gives you some refreshment where you can be at peace and be still and just unwind, and you don't have to think too hard about anything. For me, when I'm at home, the ocean does that for me. I'm from San Francisco, like I said. And when I'm on the road, it's a park or a forest, a trail that I can let Ember off leash and we can go for a walk. But just taking a break, stepping away from my computer, like I mentioned earlier, and just having a place that I don't have to think about too much and I can just relax and have that few moments of peace in the midst of chaos. All right, so those are the things you can do for yourself personally. What about for those of you who are managers? You have an additional responsibility, right? You aren't only responsible for yourselves, you're responsible for the well-being of your team as well. And don't get me wrong, ultimately, of course, it's up to each of those people to take care of themselves and know their own boundaries and be able to set those boundaries and be firm on them. But you're the umbrella for that team. You're the barrier. You're the one who can make sure that they aren't getting to a point with their work that they're teetering on burnout. So, what do you do? First of all, I'd encourage you, if you don't already, to schedule bi-monthly one-on-ones. So every other week, just check in with your teammates. Take the time to sit down with each one of them, whether it's a walk around campus, going to grab a coffee, finding a quiet room somewhere, going to play a game, or hanging out in the library. You have an awesome campus here, by the way. But taking advantage of one of those places to just sit down and catch up. And I encourage you not to make them a status update or talking about projects or anything else, but a check-in about how your employee is feeling about their work. Not, hey, what's the red, yellow, green light on this project, but how are you feeling about the work that you're doing? How are you feeling about your workload? Is there too much on your plate? Are you feeling over your head with the current tasks that you're doing? Is there something that could give you some mentorship and some help in this area? Where would you like to go with your career? What would you like to do next? What are some of the steps you want to be taking? What projects do you want to be involved in going forward? All of those types of things. How do they feel about the team structure, the company, decisions happening within the company that are out of their control? And asking those questions on a regular basis can make sure that nothing catches you off guard as the team lead. And it can also help your employees know that they can express their feelings without repercussions, which is huge because that builds up trust in your team, which means if there are times when someone gets concerned about a particular project or feels over their head or feels like they need more help or that they aren't going to make a deadline, that they feel like they can trust you and come back and say, hey, So that project I'm working on, I do need help, or I don't understand what I'm doing, or I need some clarification, without feeling like they're scared of getting reprimanded or getting fired for making a mistake, right? Secondly, speaking of mistakes, mistakes happen, right? So when they do, have blameless postmortems. This is a whole other topic, could be an hour-long session on their own. I actually think Jessica DeVita came and spoke about retrospectives and things like that. And she's amazing, so you should go watch the talk. But there's a lot of research done around it. There's a fantastic book called Accelerate, which is by Nicole Forsgren, that goes into retrospectives and postmortems and everything as well. But I'd encourage you, even when you're not in crisis mode, have retrospectives. What's going well? What's not going well? What could we as a team be doing better? And sitting down and having those conversations with your whole team, similar to the one-on-ones, they aren't to evaluate your employees' performance, but it's to keep a pulse on what's actually happening in the team, so that you as a manager aren't surprised or caught off guard by these things that come up all of a sudden, because you're aware of what's happening on the day-to-day and you're involved in those conversations all along. You can help prevent burnout, you can help prevent additional stress, you can help see problems that might pop up down the road earlier so that you can help prevent those as well. And you can have an open line of communication, which again is a great way to prevent problems from popping up down the road that might cause issues with deadlines or teammates or interpersonal issues or anything else. You've seen this slide before, right? So encouraging time off. I mentioned earlier manager of a manager who encouraged time off, the manager who would also keep track of how often we were taking time off as a team. And I know that there's a certain extent where that seems a little bit creepy and a little bit micromanagery, but honestly, it was really comforting to know that, like, okay, I am expected to take at least a day or two off every couple months. And not only expected, but my manager's encouraging it. And he's keeping an eye on it because he knows that I will be working better and functioning better as an employee if I'm also taking care of myself and taking that time off to see what I need to do on my own. This is a last major tip that I have for managers. It's a little bit confusing and might take a little bit of extra talking to your boss about it. And I encourage it for individual contributors as well, but it's a little bit easier to sell as a manager. But it's this idea of taking 4 hours every 2 weeks out of your normal workload, out of your normal day. So 4 hours on a Friday, 4 hours on a Monday, to take a step back and see the forest as well as the trees and decompress. And there's a lot of information. I'll link to a blog post about it, but I'll sum up here. So keep in mind, first of all, I'm one of you, right? I've been a manager in the past. I now run my own business, so I fully understand just how busy you all are, how hard it is to get everything done every week, how much it seems like, or how much time it seems like to say, well, it's 4 hours, even if it's just every other week. It's 4 hours out of 80, but it feels like a lot in the moment. But one of my colleagues, J. Paul Reed, came to me a few years ago with this idea of a 4-hour decompress. And it's this time to take a step back and reflect and evaluate and kind of recenter our goals and ideas before tackling another work week. And I kind of shook my head at the time, you know, it's too much time, my boss will never approve it, I can't take that much time out of my schedule. But it's 4 hours that's gonna make you stronger, more effective, more efficient, and more motivated to your work on a regular basis and better able to serve your team as well. Can lead to great ideas of how to lead and grow your team, your career, your own projects, as well as kind of figure out problems that are happening that you might not have seen without that time taken to step back and look at it. So here's the basic idea. First, you find a place to kind of relax and get comfortable, spread out, decompress, whether it's a coffee shop, the library, hiking trail, pool, wherever you can go, find that spot. And during this first hour, you deliberately disconnect from your normal day-to-day work. So that might mean sending the last few emails, finishing up the last 5 minutes of a project you're working on, whatever it is that you need so that you can get it out of your mind and actually disconnect from the stuff that you're doing for work. You can spread out, you can relax. I usually wrap up a few things at home and then go for a run or a walk through the park with Ember to kind of just have that actual disconnect process. During the second and third hours, you can find something that's constructive and helpful but lets you stay disconnected from your everyday work. So for me, that's usually digging into a book that I've been reading, a business book, a productivity book, something along those lines, or whiteboarding latest topics that I've been looking up and been interested in. And then as you wind down from those couple hours of digging into that businessy perspective side of things, the last hour kind of brings it all back together. So I'll usually journal a little bit about what I'm learning from the book or what I learned while whiteboarding, things that I want to take back to some of my clients that I'm working with at the time, perspectives that I can help out teams with, how I'm feeling about work in general, what my burnout status is. When I was doing this as a manager, it was a lot of, how do I help my team? How do I be there for them? How do I make sure that we're all communicating in different ways, but I'm helping to make sure that all of my teammates are feeling like they're being impacted and helped along the way. And then I kind of make a list of things that I want to tackle when I'm back in the office, and then start packing up and head back home. And it seems like kind of a woo-woo-y out there meditation type of thing. And part of it can be, and part of it is, and there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever, but it's also incredibly helpful to just be able to take that step back and go, okay, how have things been going lately? How have things been functioning within my team? How do I feel about the projects that we're tackling? Does it seem to fit with the main goals of the company? How are we doing making progress toward finishing this big project? Or how are my teammates working together? Let me take a look at some of the interpersonal things that have been going on lately. And being able to take that step back is huge as far as being able to be effective, helping your team be more effective, and being aware of what's going on. And if you're having a hard time convincing your boss of this, I've done a couple different things. So you can talk about turning in some sort of summary of things that you're learning or observations that you made while you took that time. You could have a sync with them at the beginning of the next week to go over some of those items that you learned or observed. And some of these times have been the best times of like, okay, here's where we're at. Here's where we want to be in 6 months. What are some good ideas of ways to get there? How do we find a way to get from point A to point B in an effective manner that's going to work for both me and my team? Because at the end of the day, like I mentioned at the beginning, you're the umbrella for your team, right? It's up to you to protect them from stressors. It's up to you to keep them informed on company-wide initiatives. But it's also up to you to make sure that they don't have too much on their plate, that they're getting along well with their teammates, or that if there's some really difficult interpersonal issues, that maybe the team is switched up a little bit. Maybe you add someone else from a different team. Maybe someone on your team is a better fit for another team entirely. And as small companies and startups deal with this, and bigger companies do as well, it's fairly common for people to bypass the manager and just go straight to the employee, right? So can you help me out with such and such a project that's going on right now? Or hey, I need you to help me out with this thing over here. And so as an umbrella for your team, and as you're trying to analyze some of the interpersonal things as well as see how much work is on each person's plate, that gives you the ability to keep an eye out for those types of issues and help your team protect themselves, but also figure out what needs to get filtered down to your team and what you need to be handling on your own, what you can help with and push back on and say no and set the boundaries for your team as a whole. So like I said, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a medical professional. I haven't studied psychology or psychiatry in any way other than digging into what burnout is. But I burned out about 4 years ago. I was heavily invested in a particular community. I was really, really passionate about who I was working with and the company that I was working with, but had too much on my plate and didn't have good boundaries set and was constantly working myself into the ground until I didn't have the energy to even open up my computer and look at my email. And things like that were some of the keys that I finally went, okay, I'm scared to look at my email because I now have X number of unread messages, which makes sense, but I'm not able to get myself to a point where I can actually sit down and work through some of that and work past that. So it's not just I worked really hard for a few days, although that is the start of it sometimes and can definitely be part of it, and you definitely need to be taking a break after that as well. But start keeping an eye on yourself for those types of signs. Are you nervous about looking at your emails? Are you nervous about attacking a new project that you can totally do and you know exactly how to finish every single piece of it, but you're having a hard time getting started? Are there things that you're concerned about or that you're more worried about? Are you more anxious than usual? All of those types of signs can start to point to maybe you're burned out, maybe you need a break. And part of the reason why it took me as long to recover as it did was because I wasn't relying on my community. I wasn't relying on my manager. I wasn't vocal about what was going on. I wasn't open about what was happening and the fact that I was burned out with my team because I was worried about the repercussions. And so I'd encourage you to, if you're starting to see some of those signs in yourself, go to your manager. go to a counselor, go talk to a therapist or a psychologist about some of the things that you're noticing and some of the things that you're running into. Because at the reality, at the end of the day, the major repercussions that you're going to run into if you don't talk to anyone is the burnout getting worse and getting to a point where you're not able to work. But that, as I can say, only serves to hurt you more. These days, I am lucky enough to have an incredible community of people around me. And I say lucky enough, but it didn't come from luck. It came from working at it and working really hard at it and continuing to work hard at it on a day-to-day basis. But it's worth it at the end of the day. And I'd encourage you to take a moment and look around you, right? You all work at Cerner. You're all familiar with some of the practices and some of the difficulties of working here. Everyone understands just how pressing and stressful your jobs can be. And even if you're not doing the same job, everyone can understand you need some time to yourself and you need a community to rally around you. And this can be the start of your community, in addition to friends outside of work and things like that. But these are some of your people that are here. And even if you don't have people here physically next to you, remember that you have people online too. This is one of my favorite pictures because I can't count the number of times that I've received virtual hugs when I've needed them most. And just reaching out to people on Twitter, reaching out to people on Facebook, Instagram, whatever your social media places are, and reaching out to people who don't live here and going, hey, can I chat for a few minutes? Or I'm having a rough day. Or any of those things, and just getting that support. We've got people at our fingertips these days with the power of technology, and I'd say take advantage of that, and they can sit down and empathize with you where you're at. Lastly, don't underestimate the value of you. We are valuable, we're important, we're influential, and we're worth taking care of. And I think sometimes we forget that. Quoting one more time from Overwhelmed, the author, Bridget, found herself talking to Danish women who seemingly have all the time in the world for leisure and feel no guilt about it, but also get a lot of things done. And the woman that she's speaking with said, having leisure time for myself isn't something we even have to discuss. It's just natural. And Bridget replied, you don't feel guilty or selfish that you're neglecting your children or worried about your to-do list or how it's going to impact you at work. The woman gave me a blank look. She said, I think Danish women perhaps know their worth. And I think it's important for us to know our worth. And I think sometimes we have so much of our influence, so much of our person wrapped up in our work that we forget that we are worth something outside of what we're doing for our jobs on a day-to-day basis. So we talked a little bit about who I am, about Ember, as well as my struggle with burnout. We talked a little bit about you, some of the numbers around depression and burnout in tech, as well as some of the specifics of what causes burnout. And we talked about how to prevent it and how to recover from it as well. And I'd remind you, if there's some of you who are feeling like you are burned out, it's a slow recovery, but there is a recovery. For a long time, there was a solid probably year after I started recovering from burnout that I was about 60 or 70% most days. And that meant that some days were awesomely productive and I was doing a lot of really good things, and there were other days when I couldn't open my computer and I couldn't get things done. But there was progress. And I've learned a lot about how to prevent it in myself, and I've learned a lot about what some tips and tricks are that other people use to prevent it as well. But more importantly, I've learned that it's okay to talk about it. I've learned that it's okay to acknowledge that it's real. I've learned that it's okay to give presentations like this and to encourage people to be thinking about it in themselves and in their employees as well. Because I know that it's not something to be ashamed of. I know that it's something that impacts me and other people as well. And I know that I have a community to help me too. So I'm going to end with this quote from an article from a company called the Community Roundtable. And the article is called The Dark Side of Community Management, which relates to a lot of what I do on a daily basis. But I think it also applies here. It says, passion, which could be our jobs, open source projects, projects at work, people around us, it's what drives you and gives your life meaning. Obsession is what happens when you're fixated on something, forsaking all the rest. Understand the difference between passion and obsession to change your thoughts and actions, and find balance by cultivating other interests offline. So, let's be awesome, let's be incredible, and let's be passionate, but let's be balanced in that passion as well. Thank you.